The great chamber of the Glyptodont Council was carved from the heart of a petrified leviathan, its fossilized ribs arching high into the cavernous gloom, each one a testament to an age when gods roamed the primordial oceans of their homeworld. The air, thick with the scent of ozone and ancient dust, seemed to vibrate with a tension that was as old as the bones surrounding them. Light, a pale, sterile luminescence, bled from a crystalline oculus in the ceiling, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed like specters of doubt across the polished obsidian floor. In the center of this hallowed space, suspended in a shimmering field of gravitic energy, floated the Grand Orrery, a complex and beautiful mechanism of swirling nebulae and precisely orbiting celestial bodies, representing the known territories of the Glyptodont hegemony. For generations, its placid, predictable rotations had been a source of comfort, a symbol of order in a chaotic cosmos. But now, a single, intrusive anomaly had appeared within its holographic matrix, a stark, unidentifiable sigil that pulsed with a quiet, unnerving patience. It was a warship, of that there was no doubt. Its configuration, though alien and unsettling, betrayed a purpose that transcended cultural and biological divides. It was a thing built for conflict, a vessel designed to impose its will upon the fabric of spacetime. Yet, it did nothing. It simply was. High Counselor Thrax, his carapace the color of burnished copper and etched with the swirling sigils of his lineage, rested his three-fingered hands upon the cool, smooth surface of the council rostrum. His multifaceted eyes, 1,000 tiny lenses working in unison, stared intently at the holographic representation of the intruder. It was a vessel of impossible design, a stark, brutalist monolith of a ship that seemed to absorb the very light around it. It possessed none of the graceful, organic curves of a Glyptodont cruiser, nor the crystalline, multifaceted beauty of a Xylosian starsail. It was a weapon that made no attempt to disguise itself as anything other than what it was. And yet, it remained utterly, maddeningly silent. It had not hailed them. It had not deployed fighters. It had not raised its shields or powered its weapons. It had simply appeared at the very edge of their sovereign territory, a silent, brooding sentinel at the gates of their civilization. It has been 3 full rotations of the outer moons, Thrax's voice, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the very stone of the chamber, echoed in the oppressive silence. And still, it does not speak. It does not move. It does not react to our hails, our scans, our presence. It is a ghost, a phantom in the void. To his left, Elder Counselor Vex, his shell a pale, almost translucent ivory, shifted his considerable weight. Vex was old, even by Glyptodont standards, and his wisdom was as deep and as vast as the interstellar void itself. He had seen empires rise and fall, had witnessed the birth and death of stars, but he had never seen anything like this. A silent warship is a thinking warship, he rumbled, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. It observes, it learns. It calculates. To assume it is idle is to invite annihilation. A third counselor, a younger, more ambitious Glyptodont named Kale, his carapace a vibrant, almost iridescent green, slammed a fist onto the rostrum. The sound, a sharp, percussive crack, shattered the fragile stillness. It is a provocation, a test of our resolve. They sit at our border, a predator in the tall grass, waiting for us to show weakness. We must respond. A show of force is the only language a warrior race understands. Thrax turned his multifaceted gaze upon Kale, his expression unreadable. And what if they are not warriors? What if they are something else entirely? To fire upon a silent vessel is an act of aggression, not of strength. We would be the instigators, the savages who strike at shadows in the dark. The chamber descended into a tense, brooding silence, the only sound the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the gravitic field that held the Grand Orrery aloft. The Glyptodonts were a species defined by logic, by reason, by a rigid adherence to a code of conduct that had guided them for millennia. They were not a rash people, but this silent, enigmatic warship, it frayed the very edges of their composure. It was a puzzle without a solution, a question without an answer. It was the ultimate unknown, and the unknown was the one thing the Glyptodonts feared above all else. Deep within the vessel, the Glyptodonts observed with such trepidation. A quiet and ordered calm prevailed. The ship, which they had so readily identified as a warship, was in reality something far more complex, far more profound. It was a vessel of first contact, a mobile repository of a species, entire history, culture, and wisdom. Its dark, non-reflective hull was not armor in the traditional sense, but a sophisticated network of sensors and data-gathering arrays designed to observe, to learn, to understand before a single word was ever spoken. Inside, the corridors were not filled with soldiers and weapons, but with libraries and laboratories, with art galleries and music halls, with hydroponic gardens that replicated the flora of 1,000 different worlds. It was a ship of peace, a vessel of exploration, a testament to a species that had long ago transcended the petty squabbles of conquest and empire. In the ship's central communication hub, a single human sat before a holographic interface, her face illuminated by the soft, ethereal glow of the screen. Her name was Alara, and she was a diplomat, a linguist, a historian, and a xenopologist. She had been chosen for this mission not for her martial prowess, but for her boundless empathy, her unwavering patience, and her profound understanding of the delicate and often perilous dance of first contact. For 3 days, she had watched the glyptodonts, had monitored their frantic, almost panicked communications. She had seen their fear, their confusion, their aggression, and she had understood. She had seen it all before in the faded, tragic histories of her own species. The fear of the other, the reflexive urge to strike first, to dominate, to destroy. It was a primal, deeply ingrained instinct, one that humanity had struggled for centuries to overcome. "They are afraid," she said, her voice a soft, melodic whisper in the quiet of the room. Her companion, a synthetic intelligence that existed as a disembodied voice and a shimmering cloud of light particles, responded, its tone calm and measured. "Their fear is a logical, if primitive, response to an unknown variable. They perceive our vessel as a threat, a projection of their own martial history and cultural predispositions." Alara nodded, her eyes still fixed on the holographic display that showed the glyptodont council chamber. She could see the tension in their postures, the fear in their multifaceted eyes. They see a weapon because that is what they expect to see. They cannot conceive of a vessel of this size and power being used for anything other than war. "It is a limitation of their perspective," the AI responded. "A failure of imagination, but it is a limitation that could have unfortunate consequences." Alara knew the AI was right. The glyptodonts were on the verge of making a terrible mistake, a mistake born of fear and misunderstanding. She had to intervene to break the silence, to offer them a different path. But how? A simple hail would be dismissed as a trick, a deception. A display of power would only confirm their fears. She needed to communicate with them on a level that transcended language, that bypassed their fear and spoke directly to their logic, to their reason. She closed her eyes, took a deep, steadying breath, and then, with a quiet determination, she began to compose a message. It was not a message of words, but of pure mathematics, of universal constants, of the elegant and undeniable language of the cosmos itself. It was a message that spoke of shared origins, of a universe born from a single, infinitesimal point, of the fundamental laws of physics that govern them both. It was a message that said, "We are not so different, you and I, we are all children of the same stardust." Back in the glyptodont council chamber, the debate had reached a fever pitch. Kale, his voice rising in a crescendo of alarm, was advocating for an immediate and overwhelming preemptive strike. "We cannot wait for them to make the first move. We must show them the strength of the hegemony, the futility of challenging our dominion." Thrax, his patience wearing thin, was about to deliver a stern and cutting rebuke when a sudden, unexpected chime echoed through the chamber. It was a sound no one had heard in living memory, the sound of an incoming message from an unknown source. Every head in the chamber snapped towards the grand orrery, where a new symbol had appeared, a shimmering, intricate pattern of light that pulsed in perfect, mathematical harmony. "What is this?" Kale demanded, his bravado momentarily forgotten. "A weapon, a virus." Vex, his ancient eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and awe, leaned closer to the holographic display. "No," he breathed, his voice filled with a sense of wonder. It is beautiful." The symbol, a complex and elegant fractal pattern, was a visual representation of a mathematical equation, a universal truth that was as old as time itself. It was a message of pure, unadulterated logic, a communication that transcended the limitations of language and culture. It was a greeting, an introduction, a statement of shared existence in a universe governed by the same immutable laws. For a long, breathless moment, the council chamber was silent. The glyptodonts, a species that prided themselves on their logic and reason, were confronted with a message that spoke their own language, a language they had believed to be uniquely their own. It was a message that disarmed them, that challenged their preconceived notions, that forced them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the silent, enigmatic warship that sat at the edge of their territory. "They are mathematicians," Vex whispered, his voice filled with a dawning realization. "They are thinkers, they are like us." The message continued to unfold, a symphony of numbers and equations, of geometric proofs and astronomical calculations. It was a message that told the story of the universe, from the first moment of creation to the formation of galaxies, of stars, of planets. It was a message that spoke of a shared heritage, of a common ancestry written in the language of the cosmos. And then, at the very end of the message, a single, simple image appeared. It was a star chart, a map of the glyptodont home system, rendered with a level of detail and accuracy that was, quite simply, impossible. It was a map that showed not only the current position of every planet, every moon, every asteroid, but also their projected orbits for the next 10,000 years. It was a map that could only have been created by a species with a profound and almost godlike understanding of the celestial mechanics that governed their very existence. The glyptodont counselors stared at the image, their minds reeling from the implications. This was not the act of a hostile, aggressive species. This was the act of a teacher, a mentor, a guide. It was a gift, an offering of knowledge, a gesture of peace and understanding. Thrax, his voice filled with a mixture of humility and awe, finally broke the silence. "They are not here to conquer us," he said, his multifaceted eyes fixed on the impossible star chart. "They are here to teach us." The chamber, which had been filled with fear and suspicion only moments before, was now filled with a sense of profound and overwhelming wonder. The silent warship was no longer a threat, but a mystery, a puzzle, an enigma that they were suddenly desperate to understand. The fear had been replaced by a new, more powerful emotion, curiosity. And with that curiosity came a glimmer of hope, a hope that this encounter would not be the end of their civilization, but the beginning of something new, something greater than they could have ever imagined. Alara watched the glyptodonts from the bridge of her ship, a faint smile playing on her lips. She had seen the change in them, the shift from fear to wonder, from aggression to curiosity. Her message, her silent, mathematical symphony, had struck a chord deep within their logical, ordered minds. It had bypassed their fear, their suspicion, their warrior instincts, and had spoken directly to their intellect, to their reason. "They are ready," she said, her voice a soft, confident whisper in the quiet of the bridge. "They are ready to listen." She opened a new communication channel, this time a more conventional one, a channel of language, of words, of ideas. She sent a simple, unassuming message, a message that was both a greeting and an invitation. "We are humanity," the message read, translated into the complex, multifaceted language of the glyptodonts. "We come in peace. We wish to learn from you, to share our knowledge with you, to walk the path of discovery together. We await your reply." The message, when it arrived in the glyptodont council chamber, was met with a stunned, almost reverent silence. The words, so simple, so direct, so utterly devoid of guile or aggression, were a stark and powerful contrast to the militaristic rhetoric that had filled the chamber only moments before. Thrax, his voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, read the message aloud. The words, when spoken in the guttural, resonant tones of the glyptodont language, seemed to take on a new weight, a new significance. They were words of hope, of possibility, of a future that was suddenly brighter, more expansive than they had ever dared to imagine. For a long moment, the council was silent, each member lost in their own thoughts, their own reflections. The implications of this message were staggering. It was an offer of friendship, of alliance, of a shared journey into the unknown. It was an offer that they could not, would not refuse. "Open a channel," Thrax said, his voice firm, resolute. "Let us speak to these humans." And so, for the first time in the long and storied history of the glyptodont hegemony, a channel of communication was opened to an alien species, not as a prelude to war, but as a precursor to peace. The silent, enigmatic warship at the edge of their territory was no longer a source of fear, but a beacon of hope, a symbol of a future that was about to be rewritten. The first contact, an event that had so often been a catalyst for conflict and destruction, was about to become something else entirely. A meeting of minds, a conv. Argents of cultures, a joining of two disparate and yet fundamentally similar species, both reaching for the stars, both searching for their place in the vast and silent emptiness of the cosmos. Elara watched the Glyptodont vessel approach, a massive, graceful ship that resembled a great armored sea creature from the abyssal depths of some forgotten ocean. Its design was a testament to a species that valued strength and resilience, a species that had carved a civilization from a harsh and unforgiving world. And yet, as it drew closer, she could also see a certain elegance in its lines, a certain artistry in its construction. It was a warship, yes, but it was also a work of art. The Glyptodont delegation, when they arrived on her ship, were even more impressive than their vessel. They were giants towering over her, their carapaces a kaleidoscope of colors and patterns, each one unique, each one telling a story of lineage and honor. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace, their massive forms belying a surprising agility. And their eyes, their multifaceted, insected eyes, they were filled with a wisdom and an intelligence that was both humbling and awe-inspiring. Thrax, the High Counselor, was the first to speak, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in Elara's very bones. "We are the Glyptodonts," he said, his words translated into perfect, unaccented English by a small, discreet device on his wrist. "We are a people of logic, of reason, of order. We have watched you, human, and we have been intrigued." Elara smiled, a genuine, unaffected smile that seemed to momentarily disarm the imposing Glyptodont. "We are humanity," she replied, her voice calm and steady. "We are a people of curiosity, of discovery, of hope. We have watched you as well, and we have been impressed." And so began a dialogue that would last for days, a dialogue that would bridge the vast, immeasurable gap between two disparate and yet fundamentally similar species. They spoke of history, of philosophy, of science, of art. They shared their stories, their triumphs, their tragedies. They learned of the Glyptodonts' long, slow, and methodical rise to sentience, their millennia-long struggle to tame their harsh and unforgiving homeworld. They learned of their rigid social structure, their unwavering adherence to a code of honor, their deep and abiding respect for logic and reason. In turn, Elara told them of humanity's chaotic, tumultuous, and often violent history. She told them of their wars, their famines, their plagues. She told them of their moments of darkness, their acts of barbarism, their capacity for self-destruction. But she also told them of their resilience, their creativity, their boundless capacity for hope and for change. She told them of their art, their music, their literature. She told them of their heroes, their saints, their martyrs. She told them of a species that had clawed its way back from the brink of extinction, a species that had learned, through bitter experience, the importance of peace, of unity, of understanding. The Glyptodonts listened, their multifaceted eyes unblinking, their expressions unreadable. They had never encountered a species like humanity, a species that was so full of contradictions, so capable of both great good and great evil. They were a species of poets and murderers, of saints and sinners, of dreamers and destroyers. They were a species that defied logic, that defied reason, that defied all their preconceived notions of what a sentient, spacefaring civilization should be. And yet, they were also a species that had achieved the impossible. They had transcended their violent past, had overcome their self-destructive tendencies, had forged a new path for themselves, a path of peace, of exploration, of enlightenment. They had built a society based not on conquest and domination, but on cooperation and mutual respect. They had become, in a very real and profound sense, better than they were. "Your history is disturbing," Thrax said, his voice laced with a mixture of revulsion and awe. "And yet you have survived, you have evolved." Elara nodded. "We learned from our mistakes. We learned that violence begets violence, that hatred begets hatred, that fear begets fear. We learned that the only way to build a better future is to leave the past behind." The Glyptodonts were silent for a long moment, their minds struggling to process the implications of what they had just heard. Their own history was a long, unbroken line of conquest and domination. They had never known anything but war, anything but conflict. The idea of a species willingly choosing to abandon its martial traditions, to embrace a philosophy of peace and cooperation, was almost heretical. "You have disarmed yourselves," Kale asked, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and contempt. "You have left yourselves vulnerable, defenseless." Elara smiled. "On the contrary," she said, "we have made ourselves scent. Wronger than ever before. We have replaced our weapons of war with instruments of peace. We have replaced our armies with explorers, our soldiers with scientists, our conquerors with diplomats. We have learned that the greatest strength is not the power to destroy, but the power to create." To demonstrate her point, she led them on a tour of her ship, the vessel they had mistaken for a warship. They walked through its libraries, its laboratories, its art galleries, its music halls. They saw the wonders of human creativity, the fruits of their scientific endeavors, the beauty of their artistic expression. They saw a ship that was not designed for war, but for life, for learning, for discovery. And then she showed them the ship's true purpose. She took them to the heart of the vessel, to a vast, spherical chamber that pulsed with a soft, ethereal light. In the center of the chamber, suspended in a shimmering field of energy, was a single, perfect seed. "This is a Genesis ark," she explained, her voice filled with a sense of reverence. "It carries the genetic blueprint of every living thing on our homeworld, a repository of life, a safeguard against extinction. Our mission is not to conquer, but to preserve, to explore the galaxy, to find new worlds, to plant the seeds of life, to ensure that the flame of existence never dies out." The glyptodonts stared at the seed, their multifaceted eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. They had built their entire civilization on the principle of survival of Thephatist, of the strong dominating the weak. The idea of a species actively seeking to preserve and propagate all life, not just their own, was a concept so alien, so foreign, so utterly at odds with their own worldview that they could barely comprehend it. "You would share your world with others?" Vex asked, his voice a low, incredulous rumble. "We already have," Elara replied. "We have seeded 1,000 worlds, have brought life to 1,000 barren planets. We have created 1,000 new Edens, 1,000 new cradles of life. We are not conquerors. We are gardeners. We are life-bringers." The glyptodonts were speechless. They had come to this meeting expecting to find a new enemy, a new rival, a new threat to their dominance. Instead, they had found something else entirely. They had found a species that was not interested in conquest, in power, in empire. They had found a species that was dedicated to the preservation and propagation of life, a species that saw the universe not as a battlefield, but as a garden that they were determined to cultivate and to nurture. It was a revelation that shook the very foundations of their civilization, that challenged their most deeply held beliefs. It was a revelation that would change them forever. The glyptodont delegation returned to their ship, their minds reeling from what they had seen and heard. The humans were not what they had expected. They were not warriors. They were not conquerors. They were something else entirely. Something new, something better. The council chamber, when they reconvened, was a very different place. The fear and suspicion had been replaced by a sense of awe and wonder. The aggression and hostility had been replaced by a sense of humility and respect. "They are not a threat," Thrax said, his voice filled with a newfound sense of certainty. "They are an opportunity to learn, to grow, to become something more than we are." Kale, the young, ambitious counselor who had so fiercely advocated for war, was silent. He had seen the Genesis ark, he had seen the seed of life, the symbol of humanity's true purpose, and he had been moved. He had been humbled. He had been changed. "We have been blind," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We have been so focused on conquering the galaxy that we have forgotten how to live in it." The council was unanimous. The humans were not their enemies. They were their friends, their allies, their teachers. They would not be met with suspicion and hostility, but with openness and acceptance. They would be welcomed into the glyptodont hegemony, not as subjects, but as equals. And so, a new era began, an era of peace, of cooperation, of mutual understanding. The glyptodonts, a species that had known nothing but war for millennia, began to learn the ways of peace. They began to explore the galaxy not as conquerors, but as explorers. They began to see the universe not as a battlefield, but as a garden. The humans, in turn, learned from the glyptodonts. They learned of their ancient wisdom, their profound understanding of the universe, their deep and abiding respect for logic and reason. They learned of their art, their music, their literature, their philosophy. They learned of a culture that was as rich and as vibrant as their own. Together, they forged a new alliance, a new partnership, a new hope for the future. They were two very different species, from two very different worlds, two very different histories. But they were united by a common purpose, a shared dream, a belief in a better tomorrow. But their newfound peace was not to last. As they stood on the brink of a new golden age, a new era of exploration and discovery, a new and far more ancient threat emerged from the darkness between the stars. It began as a whisper, a faint, almost imperceptible signal from the edge of the galaxy. It was a signal that was impossibly old, a signal that predated the glyptodonts, that predated humanity, that predated the very stars in the sky. It was a signal that spoke of a power so vast, so ancient, so utterly beyond their comprehension, that it defied all logic, all reason, all understanding. Elara and Thrax stood together on the bridge of the Genesis Ark, their eyes fixed on the holographic display that showed the source of the signal. It was a single, impossibly large object, a megastructure of such scale and complexity that it dwarfed anything they had ever seen or imagined. It was a Dyson sphere, a sphere built around a star, a sphere that was so large it could house 1 trillion souls. And it was dead. The star within it had long since burned out, leaving behind a cold, dark, and silent tomb. "What is it?" Thrax asked, his voice a low, hushed whisper. "I don't know," Elara replied, her voice filled with a sense of awe and foreboding. "But whatever it is, it's old, older than anything we've ever encountered." The signal, when they finally managed to decipher it, was not a message of greeting, not a message of peace, not a message of hope. It was a warning of a threat so great, so terrible, so utterly beyond their power to defeat, that it had driven the builders of the Dyson sphere to what? To flee? To hide? To extinguish their own star, to plunge their world into an eternal darkness, in the desperate hope that they would not be found. The message was fragmented, corrupted by the passage of eons, but its meaning was clear. There was something out there, in the vast, empty darkness between the galaxies, something old, something hungry, something that was coming for them. The final, chilling words of the message, a message that had traveled across the void for 1 billion years, echoed in the silent bridge of the Genesis Ark, a message that would forever change the course of their two civilizations. "They are coming," the message whispered, a ghost from a long-dead world. "They are coming, and they are the silence." Elara and Thrax looked at each other, their faces pale, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and resolve. The mystery of the silent warship had been solved. The first contact had been made. The alliance had been forged. But their journey was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. For in the vast, silent emptiness of the cosmos, a new and far more terrible mystery awaited them, a mystery that would test their newfound friendship, their courage, their wisdom, their very will to survive. The universe, they had discovered, was a much larger, much older, and much more dangerous place than they had ever imagined. And they were no longer alone in it.